So we've got some interesting Space Marine stuff today. A new profile for the Terminator Captain that allows your Terminators to use free stratagems, plus some interesting profiles for Space Marine things like Lightning Claws and Thunder Hammers. Let's take a look at what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and today I thought we'd take a look at the new datasheet for the Terminator Armor Captain that comes in the Leviathan box, shown off by Games Workshop the other day as part of a different preview. It's pretty good to get another glimpse as to how the new Space Marines are going to be functioning, and this guy does have some pretty interesting implications for captains in general, for their equivalents in other armies. Are they going to be a source of free command points and stratagems? Model-wise, I think he's one of the better executed ones on the Space Marine side out of the Indomitus box. People generally seem fairly happy to try and pick him up. A nice reimagined version of a classic Space Marine miniature in bigger, chunkier Terminator armor, and looking suitably ornate for a captain with a couple of tilt plates there, a few more purity seals and things. And this model is apparently painted in the heraldry of Ultramarines Captain Agaman, who's going to be a notable character in the conflict against the Tyranids. Here's a very Tyranid and Leviathan themed miniature, stomping, I think that's a Screamer Killer Carnifex head, into the ground. The miniature that's going to be coming in the Leviathan box is very likely monopose. It might be that we get some multi-part plastic kits to follow this up like the Gravis Captain did eventually. And I kind of feel that from the Wargear options that this captain has, there might just be a bit of an inkling that that is going to happen. We've got profiles for things like Storm Shields and Lightning Claws on the Terminator Captain's profile, and I don't believe that Games Workshop actually sells a Terminator Captain miniature with those bits of Wargear currently. Hopefully they do give us a flexible plastic kit for him. I think it would be really quite cool to have him armed with a whole bunch of different bits of Wargear. As I talked about in the last couple of videos as well, it does look like this guy's going to be fielded as Captain Octavius in the Combat Patrol for Space Marines as well. Looks like you can field a subset of the Space Marines in Leviathan with this guy, the Librarian, Terminators and some Infernus Marines, and that's the Marine Combat Patrol. He does have a variant datasheet for that, but I thought for this video we'd focus on the mainline 40k one as it is pretty interesting. So here we have the full rules for our Captain in Terminator armor then. Let's break down the datasheet bit by bit. For his generic rules, he's got Oath of Moment, as with the rest of the Space Marines. He can deep strike alongside his Terminator squad, and he does have the leader keyword as well, though we don't know exactly what squads he's going to be able to lead. Given how Games Workshop have previously been talking about this kind of thing, it looks like usually characters are going to be just able to lead the units that have the same sort of armor as them, and that will be backed up by his Combat Patrol datasheet, where it said that he could lead the Terminators but not the Infernus Marines out of that set. For that reason, I'd guess he's probably going to just be able to join the standard Terminators, probably the Assault Squad and the Relic Terminators as well if they still indeed have a datasheet, but I wouldn't be too optimistic about him leading Gravis Marines or other things not in Terminator armor. Maybe no enormous surprises on the keyword front. He's an infantry character with the Adeptus Astartes keyword, and for basic things on his datasheet he moves 5 inches like the rest of the Terminators, has a leadership of 6+, so no boosted leadership on the captain here. And despite being a fairly weighty character, it doesn't look like he's going to be helping out on objectives anymore. He's still only objective control 1 compared with some of the other bigger heroes that we've seen that have had more. On the defensive, this guy's Terminator plate does keep him rather safe. As per his standard guys, he's toughness 5, a 2+ save and a 4+ invul. No apparent benefit from his Iron Halo above the standard Terminator armor now. And he basically has the same amount of wounds as 2 Terminators strapped together. He's got 6 wounds rather than 3. I guess if he does find himself isolated, he's not going to be the single easiest model to take down, really quite a tough profile, though I'd guess in general he's usually going to be shielded by his squad. I'd say the most interesting things about the datasheets are the buffs that he can bring, plus his melee weapons. Both of those are pretty interesting, I think. The Terminator Captain looks like he lends 2 different buffs to the unit. First up, one called the Imperium Sword, previously a Warlord trait. This one means that you can re-roll charge rolls for the model's unit, really quite handy with the units with some scary combat profiles like the Terminators, and could potentially save on command points if they do suddenly roll short. I still don't think that just making them drop in normally is still going to be the best idea though. Unless you're using rapid ingress or something, it's only going to have a 27% chance to make the charge without this rule, and only a 48% chance with it. Usually if you're going to be investing in something as expensive as a Terminator squad plus a captain, you'd hope for a little bit more reliability making a charge rather than a coin flip. It'll be interesting to see whether it makes more sense to have Terminators start on the board or in reserve in 10th. To be honest, far more interesting and powerful though is this new Rites of Battle rule. So far it seems that some lieutenants give your models lethal hits, so auto wounding on 6s. The Librarian gave you sustained hits, so exploding 6s, but it seems like, unlike the reroll ones that we're so used to in 9th edition, the Captain's innate damage buff is just completely gone. This guy doesn't give you any extra damage to the full unit at base, but it potentially gives you something even more powerful in the ability to use a whole bunch of stratagems over the game completely for free. The way it's worded is that once per battle round, one unit from your army with this ability can be targeted by a stratagem for 0 CP, even if another unit from your army has already been targeted by that stratagem this phase. It does come with some restrictions, but potentially that's a whole bunch of command points just over the course of the game, and they can be applied to really quite a big chunky powerful unit too in the Terminator squad. It is just once per battle round, not once per turn, so I guess it's either use it in your turn for some sort of offensive stratagem or in the enemy turn for a defensive one. And also it looks like one of the rules that you're not going to be able to double up on over the course of the army, so it means that you're very unlikely to want 2 captains in a Space Marine force, as only one of them will be able to use this rule per turn. I guess that probably makes sense, otherwise your armies might just be spamming an obscene amount of CP every turn. It is kind of interesting as well that you can double up on a stratagem. Say for example that will probably work on a command point reroll. You could maybe have a reroll for your Terminator unit even if you've used it elsewhere, and that is kind of fun. Just from what we've seen so far, there look like there's some very powerful options to be using this with each turn, and you could certainly flex it out over the course of the battle, deciding what's the most use each turn. The rule's quite simple, but due to the option of stratagems that you'll have available, they will have a whole ton of options here. Probably one of the most obvious for a Terminator squad is that new Armour of Contempt one. That one gives you a reactive +1 to your armor saves against enemy shooting, so that will make them a lot better at withstanding AP-1 or AP2 fire. I feel like you'd be adding really quite a lot of defense even if you just spammed that every turn. Otherwise though, if they do get charged by something obscene, they could use that Fight and Death one. The new Overwatch will apparently be able to get you an inaccurate volume of fire out to 24 inches in the enemy's turn, with a whole bunch of storm bolters that could be very handy for frying a weak enemy unit. Maybe something like some Eldar with some fancy guns that are just about to inflict some massive damage. Command point rerolls for an armor save aren't the worst thing, and I believe that you'd probably be able to target rapid ingress with this as well. So far at least we haven't seen any rules that stop you using stratagems on units off the board. I think that will need a little bit more confirmation though from the core rules. It is kind of interesting as well that the strength of this will kind of be better in detachments with better stratagems. When Space Marines do get their codex, and presumably they have a whole ton of different detachments to choose from, anything with stratagems that are particularly good for a Terminator squad will absolutely make this better. GW seem to have teased that there's going to be a first company assault force of some sort. I can't help but think that that's going to have some pretty decent support for Terminators, and it could make the Captain even better there. Overall, this does look like very, very valuable stuff, quite apart from anything that the Captain can add in terms of damage and defense himself. Speaking of which though, we get a couple of profiles for ranged weapons. We've got the generic combi weapon profile, the same one that we saw on the Librarian. Again, this might be another small hint that we aren't getting different profiles for things like combi melters and combi plasmas. It's just a generic profile that hits slightly worse on a 3+, not a 2, and gets anti-infantry 4+, and devastating wounds. More exciting in my opinion are the melee weapons he can be armed with, as it's actually got a surprising amount of different options. Plus it basically gives us a few more reveals as to Space Marine power weapons and things, relic blades, paired lightning claws and thunder hammers in particular. I feel like it's kind of interesting that he's got quite so many options here. I really can't help but think that this might imply that we are getting a full multi-part Terminator Captain model, as to my knowledge none of them so far come with paired lightning claws or that relic shield option on the Wargear abilities section on the bottom right. In 10th edition, Games Workshop do seem to be fairly zealous about only giving you the rules for the things in the box, so it could be good news for a Gravis Captain style release for a big Terminator Captain with loads of Wargear choices. His default option and the one for this model will be the relic weapon, basically a version of the power sword. This one gives you 6 attacks, hits on 2s, strength 5, AP-2 and damage 2. Looks like compared with things like the power fist and things it gives you +1 attack. Maybe not so enormously dissimilar from things like the Chaos Space Marine Accursed weapons. A fairly solid generalist profile, that'll be quite good for cutting down things like intercessors. Otherwise, the Power Fist gives you 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 8, AP-2 and damage 2. Lost a pip of AP, but it hits more accurately now. The Chain Fist we've already seen, that one only hits on 3s as its one worse weapon skill. It has the same profile as the Power Fist, but gets anti-vehicle 3+, so it's extra good at dealing with extra tough armoured targets. Perhaps the most interesting though, as they're going to be weapons that crop up on different units, are the Thunderhammer and the Twin Lightning Claws. The Thunderhammer, it's revealed, has basically got the same profile as the Chain Fist, a Power Fist that only hits on a 3+, and I'm afraid it is only damage 2 now, not damage 3. The advantage of the Thunderhammer is that it seems to get devastating wounds, So that means when you get a wound roll of a 6 on this weapon, instead of getting the normal damage output for it, you'll get 2 mortal wounds on your target instead. That's quite helpful to be honest, and it'll punch through high invuls, high armor saves, and be interestingly a little bit more effective against hordes as well. So I feel like that's quite a good bonus. Finally, we've got the twin lightning claws. These ones give you 7 attacks, so 2 extra from his base it would seem. They hit on 2s at strength 5, AP -2 and damage 1, and they get that generic twin linked profile, so re-rolling wound rolls. Looks like where lightning claws are differentiated, they're keeping a lot of the similar flavour. At first glance, my guess is that these weapons will actually be costing the same amount of points, I suspect. The damage profiles do seem at least fairly balanced against each other, some of them better against anti-horde, some against anti-vehicle, but there's nothing that's just flat worse against literally every target. Seeing a whole bunch of weapons that had a fairly similar damage output, I kind of couldn't help but try and break the maths down on them and see which are most effective. So here's those weapon profiles and roughly how many wounds they cause on average to these targets. Just looking at a range of different things that he could be in combat with, everything from termagants, intercessors, terminators, rhino tanks and land raiders with the big toughness 12. Against most targets the variance isn't actually enormous, most of them at least have some sort of threat into everything. As you'd expect, the lightning claws are better against the hordes, the chain fist is far better against the vehicles, though it would fall down a bit if it was fighting monsters, in which it wouldn't get that 3+ to wounds. The numbers on the relic weapon, the power fist and the thunder hammer all come out at surprisingly even, to be honest. The extra attack sort of being comparable between the relic weapon and the fist, and the mortal wounds evening things up a bit between the hammer and the rest. I feel like you could happily field any of them and really not feel too bad, which is kind of nice. I think if you're getting into splitting hairs of optimization between those, I'd probably say the power fist generally outweighs the relic weapon, but just by a bit. Most of the numbers are very similar, it's only against tough vehicles where the relic weapon has to wound on a 6 where the power fist really gets ahead. The thunder hammer's definitely going to be a bit swingier depending on whether you roll those magic 6s or not, but it does come out slightly ahead against the power fist against really tough targets with high saves. The mortal wounds are more powerful there, and also against the Terminator as well, again due to the high save and mortal wounds being extra valuable against that kind of target. Overall, I think if these do all wind up costing the same, I'd probably be the most tempted by the power fist, thunder hammer or chain fist. They're all at least fairly generalist, and it just depends on whether or not you want to skew towards being very good against vehicles and a bit worse against most other targets. I do quite like it that most of them are kind of similar though. Finally, we do have another couple of options on the datasheet as well. An auxiliary grenade launcher, which I believe is to represent the bit of kit on the bottom right. This one from an older Terminator Captain. I wonder if it might make a reappearance on a new multi-part plastic model potentially. Previously this gave you an extra shooting profile, now it looks like it just grants the grenades keyword, confirmed to be a core stratagem that we still don't know exactly what its effect is. Might be a way of handing out some mortal wounds or something to do with charging, I suppose. Finally, the last bit of kit that he can pick up is called a relic shield, kind of a similar name to the Indomitus Captain that we had in 9th. Looks like this could give us a bit of a clue as to how storm shields work in 10th edition, giving them an extra wound rather than an improved save. This relic shield puts him up from 6 wounds to 7 wounds, a small but meaningful durability increase, but I'm not 100% sure whether that's really going to be worth trading out the gun for. From first impressions, it does seem that they've weighted these bits of Wargear, so you're not going to fall too far behind regardless of what you choose. Overall, he looks like a pretty fun datasheet, I think. The melee weapon profiles are really quite cool to see, though I feel like the most interesting thing about him is that ability to just farm up loads of command point stratagems for your Terminators and either make them just very tough every time they get shot, or do something else powerful or nasty, all without spending CP. Again, generating command points is massively valuable, and I feel like that could make up a huge chunk of his overall utility on the board. Unless Games Workshop decides to put him at a points cost that's really astronomical, I can strongly suspect a Space Marine Captain appearing in a lot of Space Marine lists. Like in 9th edition, again I suspect that we probably wouldn't be seeing all that many duplicates of them though. Their value is going to be going way down if you can only use this rule once. I do find it pretty interesting as well that things like Lieutenants and Librarians are going to be giving more direct damage buffs than Captains are. That's going to be a bit of a mentality shift. Might help differentiate their roles a little bit though. If you mix a Lieutenant and a Captain into a unit, maybe of standard Primaris Marines, it looks like you'd be able to get free stratagems alongside that generic damage buff. In any case, let me know your thoughts. What do you make of the new Space Marine combat weapon profiles? And what stratagems so far would you be tempted to use with your Space Marine Captain on a Terminator squad? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. and you can find that linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.